October 6th. We have a relatively full agenda, and we have, we're being live streamed and being recorded for later viewing if anybody can't make it to this morning. I'll pass it off to Megan.
Good morning, everyone, and happy policy meeting day. This morning we have items that we largely talked about last month and are advancing on our agenda. So I'm going to jump right into those that are at the top, which are proposed for adoption. Policy and AR 151, student athletics. Last time we looked at this from the standpoint of adding language relating to name, image, and likeness, which is the idea that our students could benefit from their name, image, and likeness, which is a relatively, I guess, current trend. We're seeing that at the college level and now at the high school level. And PIAA has sought to put some parameters around that, which we're honoring here in the district. The intent, like sort of the overarching intent here, is to allow for this so long as it's compliant, but at the same time we want to be sure that if any of our student athletes are engaging in this, they're doing so that in a way that doesn't compromise their eligibility or the eligibility of others. So the language which was drafted by Whistler with some input from our department is what you see here, which we reviewed the last time. In addition, we talked about last time, there are other things that need to be addressed, items that need to be addressed throughout this policy because it hasn't been reviewed for a while more comprehensively. So we're going back and working with our athletic council and others to update this more generally. So this is a larger project for the balance of this year. But for now, we wanted to be sure we updated the language that we felt needed to be in there, and then we will move forward with further revisions. So like I said, for today, we really were focused on the NIL language, and there was also some sample language that's reflected in the AR on page 9 relative to a question that had come up in our discussion the last time. That is a little bit outside the scope of the NIL provisions. So I don't know if Ken, you had anything to add to that?
No, not really. It's the same. It's for the most part the same language on the NIL that we had presented to you last month, but it was informed also by last month's discussion. So happy to answer any questions. By the way, Kristen is not attending, but she is attending remote. So if you see me on my phone, it's because she's sending me notes. Not that I'm not multitasking.
Are there any questions?
Is anyone? Have we had any athletes who are currently involved in this, or
I think we have
monetizing their likeness?
I think we have potentially areas, but at a very low level of, I mean, we're not talking about Nike deals, maybe like the local pizza shop kind of thing, but there's not any that we're aware of that are currently in our system that this would apply to.
And I'm only aware of one anywhere else, and I can see it happening here or somewhere else. It's where a company like hires a student to be like a sales rep for like, I'm making this up, like a protein powder or something, where they like, get some kid who's on the, the football team or the soccer team, and then they go and they start, and they may be using their name and image for that reason. That's one scenario I could see happening at a high school level.
And
does this also apply, to non-athletes who are musicians or artists or anything of that nature?
This policy does not, because none of those activities actually have rules and regulations about that. PIAA came out with rules about this.
Thank you.
Did we discuss something about, but if there was an influencer, for example, like a TikTok, that they would not be able to use like our district information, correct?
We had that discussion, but that's not this policy.
Right. Is that something that we should have in a different policy? Is that something that exists in a different policy?
We can, we didn't look at it, but we will.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure that we needed it, but it's worth,
I'm
Yeah.
not sure I'm not sure what you could do to somebody in that situation, other than just regular making sure. I mean, we get us into whole issues of like, things like trademark and copyright, things like that, in terms of if they were using the district symbol and things like that. But, I mean, with an athlete, if they tried to monetize and tried to appear on, I don't know, ads or whatever with representing themselves as a member of the team, we can impose consequences on that. PIA has the authority to impose consequences on that. I'm not exactly sure, and have to think through what consequences you could actually impose on a student who used the district name. I mean, it could be disciplinary consequences, but it's just a different set of rules, that's all. Hey, Anna.
I think I'd like to see in the opposite direction, because we have this protections in here that nobody in the school will influence a student doing this, and I think in some other areas that would be important to have that as well. As a risk management kind of issue, that understand that if something happens and it was influenced by a teacher or somebody else at the school, that could be something that is.
I just want to make sure I hear that I'm.
Let me, sorry, I've lost my voice.
No, that's-
I'm over here in,
What page?
5, trying to find out where it is, sorry. Of course I can't find it when I brought this up.
It says, I think it's
It
the
says
second
no
paragraph.
district,
Yes.
school, or anyone
Mhm.
employed by the district may solicit, arrange, or negotiate.
Pay for students, those type of things.
I'm thinking that might fit in with our employee policy around standards of conduct, there might be a place for that there, to more broadly talk about that in the context of what an employee is or shouldn't be doing.
Sure.
And especially if they're getting paid for it, that would constitute an outside activity or business interest, in which case there's a whole host of regulations that would apply to them, including, not being allowed to use the district name, et cetera.
what happens if the student athlete is promoting their parents' product? I mean, it's not unusual for parents in our district to have a protein powder. That's what actually made me think of it, the protein powder example, like have that kind of product.
There's just rules on using the district's name and likeness and things like that, that's all.
But it doesn't influence the piece about, who is that person, who's representing the student? Because then the student,
The rules do not apply in the context of the individual's own child. Parents or guardians are entitled to assist with their own child's NIL use.
right.
Yeah, it says that, actually says that in here. Is that what your question is?
Yeah, I guess that was my question around, if it doesn't pertain to someone's using their own child, and that child is promoting that parent's product, am I reading something into it that doesn't need to be there?
What do you want the answer to be?
I don't know, it's a question.
So in other words, should we make it explicit that, or can we make it explicit that parents, guardians are excluded from being considered an entity that's
I think you can.
promoting?
I think you can, but is that what you want to do?
Lucy, could you say more about why we would?
I actually hadn't thought it through. I was just, it occurred to me sitting here. Just that whether or not there's a conflict of interest on the parent-child piece of it, if that parent is also the entity.
Well, we're not, what this policy doesn't say is that a student can't do that. Well, there's nothing to stop a student from being a sales rep for the ABC protein powder company. The fact that their parents own it or not doesn't matter. The fact that what they can't do, whether it's their parents' company or somebody else's company, what they can't do is use the district logo image. They can't represent themselves as captain of the lacrosse team. They can't do that no matter who owns the company, even if it's their parents.
Got it, thank you.
Just one other quick question, and maybe, I don't want to belabor this issue, maybe I'm thinking too detailed about it, but does the policy apply to student athletes who are trying to monetize their name? Does it have to be in context of them being an athlete?
Yes. Well,
In
yes.
other words, if you're doing it for your parents' company, unrelated to your, so does the same rule apply to athletes as opposed to non-athletes? Or are athletes held to a stricter standard? That's my question.
No. The only thing that the athletes can't do is use the district's name, their affiliation with the team. They can't be trying to market the thing during lacrosse practice. They can't be promoting it during the school activity.
I said,
They can't be walking around practice wearing a Buy My Protein Powder t-shirt.
great, thanks.
If we're done, I have a nitpicky thing. On, where'd it go? Sorry. Page 17, the LGBT attachment, it's the beginning of attachment B. So I have this thing in my head that a former board member always talked about, that we say Harrington and Lower Merion, but when we say Lower Merion without saying Lower Merion High School, it's just that we should be saying Lower Merion High School as opposed to just Lower Merion, so that it's just more clear.
I just also have a quick question, and maybe it's just because I'm new here in terms of the definitions. I was curious, does checkpoint have a definition? If you look at just in the same place we were with Lucy, the page 17, where it talks about what the grade point average is as opposed to end the quarter, it's changed to checkpoint. And there's no, in the definition sign, maybe we should define checkpoint.
Does not, and we can easily add one.
Wait, so I had the same question as Mr. Fetterman. So is checkpoint the actual grading cycle now? Or is,
Yeah, I could talk about that. So we're cumulative grading, and what we do is at certain points in time, we pull down our grades. It's not a reporting out for the public, but it's reporting out for us. It also allows us to then send transcripts to colleges at that point in time.
are those dates already set?
They are, yep. We set them before the school year starts.
So I guess my main concern, the question behind the question is students would be aware of when those are. So it's not a gotcha of when they would be tested for eligibility.
It's not a gotcha, yes,
Okay.
not at all. And it's not, but you know what I want to do? I want to talk to the principals about it a little bit as well. I just want to make sure that we all feel good about the language that's here. And so, but it is not a gotcha at all.
So is that published on the website or anything of
It's
when?
not, because it's not reported, it's not like we are reporting progress reports to parents at that time. What it allows us to do is just, like I said, we pull for grades that we can put on transcripts. It allows us to say, you need to catch up on this, you're not doing this, because we're cumulative, right? And so there's nothing from a grading perspective that wouldn't allow us to do that in our second chance learning or make sure students are where they need to be. It really is just more of a check for us to make sure that they're on track for what they should be doing in their courses.
I understand how you're describing it. I guess my concern is how are parents able to support their students and following up with that if there's not clear expected guidelines of when they get reports
So
for the
it's cumulative, so a parent sees the student's grade all year long on
Right.
Power School, right? And so we don't report out at the high school to parents. Power School is updated every single day, as you know, and that's how parents track grades.
I understand, but if teachers are using the data at certain points, guided by a principal to have certain interventions, and there's not, on the flip side of the coin, a conversation with parents or with families about also those concerns or interventions or additional supports, it's a little bit of a gotcha. And/or could leave us open to not fully supporting students in the best to our ability.
So our expectation is that that's happening on a regular basis.
But it's not.
At the high school, I think we do, because we're cumulative grading, I would argue that we do a nice job of making sure that we're monitoring grades on a regular basis. Even at the district level and the building level, we'll pull reports to see what students are not on track on a regular basis and talk to teachers about it. The checkpoints are just there as sets for us, just to make sure also that we have transcripts that we can pull for college and a couple other.
So let me try this again in a different way. So what I am saying is I understand how you're describing how you are using it. I also want to acknowledge that there is much community dissatisfaction with cumulative grading at the high school away from the quarter. Some people I'm sure love it. There's also people that really don't like it. What I hear you just saying is that teachers and administrators are pulling this for interventions, for what I have not heard is how teachers, administrators are then being directed to also communicate with families after use of that data to support the whole child in improving. And my concern related to this is if at a checkpoint, this ambiguous thing that's not published on the website and people know about but maybe don't, a student could have a gotcha of all of a sudden not being on track, and parents, if they haven't been checking Power School, wouldn't know either that the teacher was prioritizing intervention here, but they had no idea.
Right. So it is a point for us to be able to have conversations with parents if we need to. It is not so that we say somebody's not eligible. It's a point where we're saying, I hear you. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just explaining to you.
I think the question, and maybe I'm not hearing it correctly, is do we tell parents when these checkpoints are?
We do not.
Okay.
Yeah.
The
They're not
seniors know. The seniors know.
Yeah.
Because the checkpoints tend to be aligned to transcripts going out in the fall, transcripts going
They do.
out in January.
And
So
in the
the
third
seniors
quarter.
definitely know. So there might need to be a broadening of that to the other grades.
And
Right.
they do, and the
But the
mid-year aligns to the semester ends. It aligns like that, yeah.
Does it correlate to the district, because on the calendar, there is district semester grades issued.
It
Does correlates to that, so
It
that
does.
is a checkpoint, that is issued but how far in advance, I guess, is the question, how?
So it correlates with when you would think a quarter is, a semester is, the next quarter. It's a time frame similar to when we would have quarters or a semester. That is what it correlates to, yes.
Well, it seems to me that it's clear from this discussion that it has to be defined
Yeah.
for purposes of this
Yep.
policy.
Yes.
And just transparency for parents. I know it's nice for us to all say, parents have access in Power School. Parents get 100 emails a day. In the high school level, you're checking Power School for all different classes. Like having some explicit consistency of when teachers are being directed to look at these things allows parents to support transparently in their student success, whether it's for athletics or actual grades, because by taking away the quarters and just telling parents, look on Power School, it absolves the district from actually having to partner with parents. And it's what the feedback, whether you agree with it or
So
not.
I understand what
Alexis,
you're saying. I said.
whether you agree with it or not, the feedback from
Right.
parents in going to this system that I hear from parents in the community is that without having clear quarters, to know when teachers have updated everything they need to, because let's be honest too, not all teachers keep up with Power School regularly until they have to the night before, and then kids are surprised. There isn't a lot of accountability for the adults in our schools to partner with parents, except for at the end of the year or when an actual interim or final report is published.
Right. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'll
I'll
circle
follow
with principals as well about it.
I'll follow up on that. I've heard less about families being The concern that I've heard the most, let me rephrase that, the concern I've heard the most is teachers not inputting the information in a timely manner, right? So that, and not all teachers, there's some teachers wait until the end, right?
It is
That
not
is-
all equal. I don't disagree with that, for sure. So I'll follow up with principals about it.
So we're going to define checkpoint for the purposes of this policy and have more broad conversations about the concerns that were raised here. And so with,
All right, Megan, even, sorry to interrupt, is the clarifications and guidelines around checkpoints, is that something we would add to the AR? Or you would put it in a staff handbook or a student handbook?
well, that's where I think it's like I would think that also needs to be defined in our student and family guide.
Yeah.
Just so that our expectations around what that communication cycle looks like, whether there's, I think we need further clarification elsewhere beyond this policy, but for the purpose of this policy, we also need a definition. So I think it sounds like we need more conversation around that communication piece.
I agree. So definition in the policy, after conversation, put something in the AR, and then also put it in the family guide. And I think it's worthy to put in the AR because I think this is something that annually at our summer leadership retreats, we should have at least some level of discussion on to make sure that we're all on the same page. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it might also relate to the discussion items we're having later around reporting of student progress and grading of student progress. So the broader, that may be a place to consider that language as well, so.
So good.
All right.
That was good conversation. Are we ready to move on to the next? Okay.
So because that definition is in the AR, we'll move forward with the policy revisions as, for adoption, but we'll bring back the AR next time with that updated language, okay? Next on our agenda is policy number 4, which is the formulation and adoption of policies on page 26. The proposed revisions that we looked at last time was really an opportunity for us to make non-substantive edits as we move along around, I'm sorry, let Ken, because he just
Sorry to
wanted
correct.
to jump in.
No,
He's very passionate about this one.
Well, no, well, you can make substantive edits. This allows substantive edits as long as the substantive edit doesn't materially change the underlying purpose of the policy. You could always make non-substantive. So sorry to correct you, but that. Okay, well, no, the idea is if you forgot to put something in, or if there was something that's obvious that nobody wanted to state, this lets you do it without having to return for another first reading. And I am passionate about this.
Yeah. On that, I actually had a circle around that paragraph, just in terms of, would it be, I didn't understand exactly, that's subparagraph A, what you're talking about. And my question was, would it be better just to say material revisions cannot be made at the time as opposed to in the negative? If you understand what I'm saying, because it's a little confusing when I read it. It seems to say you can't make changes except for material revisions, seems to imply that you can make material revisions that, you know what I'm saying? It seems ambiguous, that's all. If what we're trying to say is you can't make material revisions, then why don't we just say that? We can do it in a footnote where you say changes in proposed policy at the second reading shall cause the reading to constitute a first reading. And then footnote, material revisions cannot be made at the time because they constitute inconsistent with the underlying policy or something like that.
Well, how about changes in a proposed policy will not prevent the policy from being adopted at the next reading
as long as the changes aren't material.
That's fine, but what happens if they are material? I guess that was my
And we have to
question.
get back to first reading.
Okay. That's why it's ambiguous, because it says changes in a proposed policy, except for material revisions at the second reading, shall cause that reading to constitute a first reading.
Oh, so it should be a shall not cause.
Shall not, that's right, okay, that's right.
And Megan, you had just slightly rephrased it about being up for adoption. And I would suggest that we take out the second reading and use that wording instead, since we've been trying to move towards a more intuitive language use, rather than first reading, second reading, but first reading and up for adoption. Intuitive to me, maybe not the rest of the world.
Makes sense.
Okay, so we're going to change it to a policy may be adopted at second reading unless the policy has been materially changed between first and second reading. Materially revised.
And then in which case it would become the first reading?
Yes. A repeat first, or a new first reading. Okay, I'll reword this, bring it back. Well, we haven't adopted this policy yet, so you can't, you can only make minor editorial revisions anyway, so we're going to have to do a repeat first read, or a new first read. Yep. This is why we need this policy.
Are there any other questions on this? So we'll bring it back for a first reading. Okay, thank you.
The next item on the agenda are a series of first readings, beginning with policy and AR 007 on page 28. The revisions were discussed the last time, although there are additional since that led to further revisions. And as soon as Ken's drafting the last language, he might want to highlight what was changed.
We're moving the time and place of board meetings to the administrative regulation. That'll give you more flexibility in terms of where you have your meetings and what time you have your meetings, and make it easier to change. You don't have to go through a whole policy reading process. That's basically what we did. Additionally, there's also that's the change between last month and this month. The changes from last month were mostly about members of the public using recording devices. All of that stuff is now in regulation. And in the regulation, we put that the normal place of business for the meetings is the district administration building, this room, in other words. But we need guidance from you as to what time you want to put in the regulation.
I think we still have to have some more conversation about that, so we can add that to the regulation at a later time.
Because this will, we can keep this on as a first reading then, or that way we'll keep this on as a repeat first read, or actually a new first read because we changed it. So we'll make it a new first read, and then in November, you can approve it when you have a time for the AR.
Procedurally, does it matter if it's a new first reading versus a repeat first reading?
A new first reading is you've changed it between the first reading. It's a different, you've changed the language since the prior first reading. A repeat first reading simply keeps the policy on the agenda because your policy says it needs to stay on the agenda until you adopt it. So if you're not ready to adopt it, but you didn't change the language, it's a repeat first read.
Thank you.
Sure.
And Ken, just a technical question, because I know we've talked about this before, but for what we're calling regulations to board policies in the 0 series, we've tried to move that to describe them as local board procedures as opposed to administrative regulations, correct? And so the titling, I just want to make sure from the standpoint of, it makes it sound like it's our decision where it's really the board setting their procedures, so.
So we'll change that for administrative regulation to local board procedure for your new first reading in October. Good catch.
So I have an unrelated question. On page 29 under B, when it says Education Committee and Special Legislative Committee, or legislative meetings. So we also have a legislative committee, but that's not what these are. And do we need to be more precise? Should we rename our committee? Like, how do we prevent confusion there?
We can define special legislative meeting. We'll add a definition for special legislative.
Ken, legislative meeting is technically the
Business meeting.
correct term for a regular board meeting, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. But we'll add a definition for that. It's simply a legislative meeting that wasn't scheduled at the beginning of the year.
That actually leads me to my next question. For the information that's now in the AR, and on page 39, that listing of things that we vote on, that is based on school code, correct? That is not, like, we can't be like, oh, well, I don't think the board needs to vote on that.
Correct.
Right, so I wonder if that's worth noting somewhere so that people, including me, know that.
We can say
Just something like aligning with school-
as
PA
currently
school code.
required by school code. Well, as currently required by school code.
Well, doesn't it say unless an exception applies as outlined immediately below or otherwise permitted by applicable law? Like the paragraph right before it?
I think the purpose is to just basically cue the reader that you just didn't decide these things, on your own, that you don't really have a choice about any of them. And this is the source. So we'll add that.
Should that be added as a cross-reference? Just at the end?
We can add the school code as a cross-reference, sure. It would be section 508, and there's a couple other sections that we'd have to. You mean cross-reference it at the end as opposed to in the section, yes. I've also seen it done where after each one, you put SC 508, SC 1101. I don't know how much cross-referencing you want. You don't need that, okay. Okay, so we'll fix that we'll make that correction. We'll add the definition of special legislative meeting, and we'll change administrative regulation to local board procedure for your first reading next Monday, or whenever your meeting is. Yep,
Next Monday.
next Monday.
It's the 16th for the policy, yeah, for review.
Okay, so we're going to hold that as a repeat first reading, correct?
New first reading.
New
Changing
first-
the language. We're changing the language from first to second, changing the language between first readings.
Do a new first reading.
Since we're being precise.
And
No, in October.
we just get excited about policy. Next on our agenda is student transportation, if we're ready to proceed, page 44 of your packet. Again, the sort of genesis for revisiting this at this moment is connected to our ongoing conversations about change in start time that's happening next year, and ways in which we can possibly consider making some adjustments that may lead to potentially more efficiencies in our transportation system in service of ensuring that we maximize the instructional time under our new scenarios. So just for anyone that's watching and anyone in this room, this will not shift the start times that we've established for next year, but may allow for some refinements in those corridors between runs, again, in service of maximizing the student time. And especially because if you'll recall, we do have a pretty tight schedule between middle school and high school. So where we're able to realize some efficiencies may have a real impact, so that those buses that are going to be there right at the beginning of the school day, we're working hard, and certainly the transportation department is working hard to see where we can make some changes that might help that situation. So this is definitely the exciting part of the meeting today. The one thing that we already started doing based on the conversation last time was to move a large portions of what was then in policy over to the administrative regulation. And as you can see, policy is left with that sort of purpose statement and a delegation of responsibility to the administration, again, to take steps, I think, in concert with what I just described. And so we didn't, largely the move was taking that language, moving it from policy to the administrative regulation. And on the, what you don't see here is the work we're going to talk about today. And I invite Aldous Filsons and Rich Siegel to join me because they took a look at some places that we could make modifications. And before we make those changes here, we wanted to talk through them a little bit so that we have some guidance from your feedback in terms of refining the language that we're proposing to do here. So Aldous, I'll hand it over to you to talk about those two areas we're looking to make some changes.
Good morning. I was hoping that after the bell times were set, I can retrieve in my unknownness at Matsonford Road, but here I am back here. So one of the areas discussed at the last meeting, and it has come up before, is the walk zones for schools. First of all, what is it, since we're talking about definitions of walk zone, there's no really definition. The walk zone is not a circle around a school. We are given, walk zone is circle around a school, but that circle is not walkable in every direction. So the walk zone at the end, when a board decides a walk zone is 1 mile, we go in and we establish how far we can get to the 1 mile away from school when it's safe. Because even if it's a walk zone, it doesn't mean that every area is safe if there is sidewalk, if there is a hazardous road in a way. So it's kind of really odd shaped thing we stretch. We looked at how, I don't have exact numbers for you at this point because I need your guidance, which areas you want to go into, because my team is still very busy with the startup of the school. And so we looked at the elementary schools. For example, Gladwin extension would have minimal impact. We're talking about few students. Belmont Hills, insignificant. Kinwood would be moderate impact. Marion, very minimal impact where we could extend it. Penn Valley, insignificant impact. When I say insignificant, it's probably 10 less kids, and it won't open a bus. It won't change really anything. Penvin, significant if a crossing guard is added, which means that maybe one bus for Penvin, you would say one or maybe 1.5 buses. For middle schools, again, Black Rock, we don't want them crossing Montgomery Avenue for middle school level, so Black Rock is minimal. Welsh Valley is very minimal. Bala-Cynwyd may be moderate, but we may need a crossing guard, and then extending into crossing Montgomery Avenue again and crossing into the deeper in the College Park area. High schools, unfortunately, Harrington High School, Iton Road is hazardous, so there's really no walk area. Even though it's a mile, there's nothing we can have students walk to Harrington. Lower Merion is a little bit different. This is very active, very congested area, so impact would be significant if we would extend the Lower Merion high schools. I mean, we would extend high schools attendance, walk zones, but if it would be Lower Merion, would have significant income. If we go into the Narberth and Ardmore, we're talking about 300 plus students would go from a bus to walking. Again, we don't have an actual yet shape of we need to know what are we looking at, because high schoolers can technically walk 2 miles to school. Is that correct, Ken? Yes. So high school, thank you. I always get confused because to the bus stop is 1.5 miles and to school is 1.5 for elementary, middle school, and 2 miles for a high school. So it's interesting the way it's set up. So that would be, high school would be significant impact. Also, like if for just to give you some of my opinions from my experience for your decision-making process, when you adjust elementary zones, parents, those are smaller children. There are kindergartners, first graders. Kindergartners technically supposed to walk with a parent. We have first graders, second graders. We have fourth graders that parent walks to the stop still. So the parent would be a lot more concerned about extending elementary zone, making their child walk. Also, since parents walk students, it will have more impact on parents' schedules, because elementary kid is different from high school kid. High school kid pretty much can independently walk to school, but elementary student may need we impacting parents more too. So like it's September and probably October too. All we dealing is people who don't like walking to their stop or to the school, who feel it's too long of a walk. You have people come to board meeting talking about that. So it's elementary school. It would be very challenging to extend a walk zone, and gain would not be that great. Middle school, there is no gain. So high school, there is a gain. So that would be something. High schoolers are more independent. They can walk farther. And from a logistical perspective, with our new schedule, now the high school is our middle tier. So if I can have 300 students, that's 4 or 5 buses. If I can use those 4 or 5 buses going directly from middle school, skipping high school and starting picking up elementary schools, it's like it gives us a little bit more ability to get to schools on time and address these buses that are going to arrive really almost when the school starts. So that's high school almost like it's probably most, what they say, lowest hanging fruit to do. So again, but we would, in order for us to do anything like that, board would have to decide. Right now, current walk zone for high school is 1 mile. So we would need a number. Is it 1.5? Is it 2 miles? And then we would develop walk zone. That's about walk zone impact, if, well, we're here to answer questions about walk zones. So,
Welcome back.
thank you.
So a few questions. First, 2 miles is far, and also I hear the impact. Have we thought about, or do you have a sense of if it would be possible for somewhere in between? Without full knowledge of how the late bus runs, could you run a similar schedule in the morning for high school students that it might not be their exact stop, but it is more like a general transportation and not as specific, that would give students that are 2 miles away an option that's sort of in between? And would that provide some flexibility?
Probably, I mean, to be honest, I haven't really like imagined that system, I have to
Okay.
think, but anything that is not exact stop and time would be a problem for
Okay.
us, because the parents want us to know what time we're gonna be there within a 5-minute difference. So if we're concerned about 2 miles, maybe 1.5 miles is an answer. It's still gonna include significant area.
Or I guess my question is a third way of setting it at 2 miles, but providing an option, an in-between option that's not exact routes, but is like shuttle stops in the morning, that if kids don't want to walk 2 miles, the shuttle stop in Narberth is at X place. They get there, that's a half mile away, not 2 miles.
The tricky part with that is we kind of responsible as a transportation that stop is within a safe walking area for the students. So it's, I would have to think and envision that system. I can't, like, on the spot to answer, it's difficult, but it would still be extra buses. So we kind of working counterproductively. We saving 4 buses, but then I'm gonna need a couple buses to do that shuttling of the students.
Yeah, and then maybe we'd save 3 if you needed 2 for the shuttle. Just like
Correct.
somewhere in the middle. And then.
Correct, but there is a legal question about, could we do that? Set a stop that is shuttle, set a stop that is, like right now, the school bus stop is, parents supposed to get a stop. Can we do that kind of stop where it's just, okay, it's like almost like a SEPTA type
Right.
of run. We're gonna stop
Exactly.
here, you just come here if you want it, and we'll pick you up and take you to school.
See if I understand. So basically, this is for students, which mileage level are we talking about now?
High school.
High school.
Anything between a mile and 2 miles? Can we just say, we're not going to provide transportation we're not going to provide transportation to anybody who's more than a mile, or we're not going to provide transportation to anybody who's between 1 and 2 miles the way we've done it. We're just going to do it but we're going to offer periodic places where people can just drop their kid off if they want their kid to take a bus. I want to think about it, but doesn't sound like a non-starter.
Okay.
Just to add on.
You wouldn't get, well, I don't know how, you wouldn't get reimbursed for those anyway, right? Because it's less than 2 miles, you wouldn't.
Less than 2 miles,
You wouldn't be
technically.
getting reimbursed anyway, so it wouldn't
Right.
affect your reimbursement.
So if
So
we- yeah,
I don't know that there would be any problem for that.
The proposal would be to extend it 2 miles, but provide a stopgap for families to take advantage of, because we don't have, my understanding, all this correct me, is that we don't have accurate numbers of how many high school students even take the bus because we provide the bus for everyone. So it's difficult to,
Everyone?
Yeah.
We have a walk zone.
well, within the walk zone.
Oh, okay,
We
I'm
don't
sorry.
have-
Yeah, okay,
We don't
sorry.
have, my understanding to date is we don't have accurate numbers of how many students actually get on the bus and utilize the bus. So we have to plan for everyone, which makes us plan for more buses than are actually filled to capacity, which makes the timing of the transitions challenging. So even if it was a year or two to see what does that garner coupled with an opt-out system, because that was my other question.
That's my next point, I will touch on that. when we-
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'll
Just
be
to-
quiet, but
I wanted to jump in
the
and say it might.
efficiencies, like
yeah.
without the data, it's difficult for us to make an informed recommendation of one way or the other. So I guess my proposed recommendation would be to take it as far as possible and then provide some other options for families to take advantage of.
Well, I think we also have to consider that parents, there's a lot of parents already with the 1 mile zone and are driving their kids to school
Right.
every day. And we have to find a happy medium. We're not so congested at the high school. So that's another piece of information we need to find out.
Yeah,
the data would-
that is my big.
No, at the school itself.
Yeah, that is a concern that I have, especially around Lower Merion High School, is not only the traffic and which is already going to be impacted, right? So maybe this all falls under, it's going to be impacted anyway, because we're moving back an hour and we're moving to probably a higher higher volume time at 8:30 than we are at 7:30, right? So I think that's already part of a concern that I think we should consider is if we extend it to 2 miles, we're just going to have that many more parents driving their kids to school. And maybe the shuttle system can mitigate that, but I do think that is very much true, living not very far and seeing how many kids from my neighborhood ask for rides when we are a quarter mile. So I just imagine kids at 2 miles are going to be like, Mom, I'm not walking. But second is parking, right? Parking is at a premium at the high school. There isn't enough parking for the seniors. It is what it is. They park in the neighborhood. The school, personally, I think, is doing the right thing in trying to shut down how many kids go to school, park in the neighborhood without a permit. And are we just going to be exacerbating that problem? And that is a real concern I have. Not suggesting we shouldn't be looking at other things, just things that I think we need to consider. Another sort of idea to throw out there is the choice zone, right? So we have the choice zone of kids that go to Welch Valley, the predominantly Belmont Hills and Penn Valley student families that live far enough, I believe, that get busing to Lower Merion High School.
I believe.
They're not so, there are kids that went to Welch Valley that now get bused to Lower Merion High School, and maybe we say, hey, you made that choice. If you're choosing Lower Merion High School, you need to walk, or you need to provide your own transportation, which goes exactly against what I was just saying, trying to minimize congestion and also minimize cars on the road, right? So if we want to be more environmentally thoughtful, encouraging more, or setting up a system where more parents are driving their kids to school isn't necessarily being more environmentally. So anyway, so one idea would be to say for those kids that are in the choice zone, if you choose Lower Merion High School, you don't get transportation. And maybe also that could help a little bit with having more kids go to Harrod.
I think the challenge is, and I'll just throw this out there, we have no data at all. So we actually don't know if that will result in more parents driving, because those parents could be driving currently. So I think it makes it a little bit difficult because it's all subjugation of what will be the downstream impacts of the change.
One other thing I wanted to add to your suggestion, I thought the shuttle is an interesting idea. But the other thing is that it probably would need more than one shuttle, and that would be a problem. I think it's a great concept, but I don't know if you could just do one shuttle, given the circumferential, the way people live around the schools.
But could the shuttle stop be integrated into an existing bus route, right? So maybe it's not a separate?
The shuttle would be, there is a challenge with the shuttle system just because I don't know the ridership number. So integrating into the regular bus, I'm going to get people calling me that bus is overloaded. So opening bus to everyone creates the issue. Plus, you have to think this area, Ardmore and Narberth, one bus stop picks up 30 kids sometimes. So it's already like there's buses that have 3 stops and they are here. So it's not a long bus run around here for most of the people. So it's kind of already is, and I just want to address one thing that when we say, we don't know exact ridership because it's really hard to tell, especially middle school, high school, they use late buses, so it's not like you can count that some ride in the morning, some ride in the, but if you go out to like a Black Rock Middle School at the time of when they arrive to school, take a look at the buses. If you have a time, you're welcome to arrive. Buses are full. I get complaints. What we do to address that, to make sure that we don't have empty buses, middle school bus can have 42 students, 2 per seat. That's a max that we can. We assign 48, 50 students, which already compensates for the students that may not be using bus. So, I mean, I'm dealing with buses at Welsh Valley that parents feel are too full. We often have to readjust it. So we kind of, the buses, I went out to middle schools, you were at Welsh, buses are full. I mean, the majority buses are very full to the point where we have parents complaining. Part of what we're doing is also dealing with a driver shortage, so that's why runs are full. And in middle school level, full runs created discipline issues too, significantly. So it's not like we're running much under capacity, but I completely agree. It would be great for us to know who will use a bus, who will not use a bus. And that's going to be next thing I'm going to touch on, but.
I will say, so I've had the opportunity to be out at schools during arrival time, and I agree with you. Middle school buses are largely coming in and they're full or almost full. How do you, what number of kids do you put on a high school bus? Is it the same scenario?
Depending on the area, we kind of, historically, our routing department knows which areas ride more and which ride not as high ridership. Some high school buses have up to 70 kids assigned to 42 seats. 48 seats, yeah, 72 kids assigned to 48 seats. So high school buses are very much over-assigned because obviously that's the area where the ridership is lowest. And still, sometimes we get the complaints and we have to make adjustments because high schoolers, 3 per seat is a problem.
Yeah, that's all really helpful, and thank you. I think another point on this shuttle idea, you originally said we could save 4 to 5 buses at Lower Merion if we went to a 2-mile walk zone. And a shuttle system, I would propose also having people have to opt into it, similarly to the private school, so then you could get a few account and plan accordingly. I don't doubt that it's meticulous. I guess even if it was 2 or 3 buses, the challenge that I've heard you all share over and over is we don't have more buses to be able to put in. So even 1 or 2, my question is, would that make any sort of substantial difference in how we were able to make up time in other areas? Or is there like a threshold of unless we have 5 buses, things won't get more efficient?
No, there is any bus helps. There's really no threshold, and numbers I'm saying, it hasn't been totally analyzed. I'm saying that's a general number, 300 plus. It may be 3 buses, it may be 4 buses that we're saving, but I don't want that number to stand by that number at this point. So we can do, if we decide that high school one is we're looking at, we can draw the walk zone that we would imagine. Mm-hmm. We can share how it would look. We can also tell you how many kids would then go from buses to being walkers. And that may be something helpful for that would be data for your decision. Again, shuttle buses, it's possible, but it's really hard for me to make sure that I know who is, and it's important for me to know who is on a bus too, in case there is accident or something. So, and I don't know who is on the bus when it's a shuttle bus.
Well, if kids had to opt into the shuttle bus, you could though.
If they would opt in, yeah.
Similar, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, but that would be in general, maybe when we see opt-in or opt-out data, maybe we don't even need a shuttle bus or whatever, but I wish I could run the whole system like that with a certain stops. I mean, we would be way more efficient if we wouldn't have to go to corners and everything. We would have one general stop, but I can assure you that people will still not be happy even if the shuttle is offered. If the ones that will have an issue is a walk zone. Other option is, like I said, it's only mile now. 1.5 miles will make a significant difference. You don't have to go out 2 miles possibly, right?
Yeah, I guess in this is just fodder or food for thought in all of this. I think at some point, our community, we have to think about something has to give. So I understand your points, Lucy, about people not wanting to walk. I understand people saying absolutely no, we cannot change lunch and learn. I understand all of these pieces. And the reality is, if we want to have start times be as they are, we can't keep everything exactly the same and have it be the Ritz-Carlton in every single scenario. And so I'm not just saying that to you all this, I'm saying that as a commentary that I've experienced in dealing with the situation. Some people are going to be upset with how it impacts their personal situation. And also, we can't have absolutely everything we want if we want to make substantive changes to some of our fundamental policies and things we've had in place for years. So
I think that's a
Putting that
really,
out there.
yeah, I think that's a really valuable point and well stated. And also, I would just say people aren't going to be happy, but I think we need to be very careful, especially when we're talking about Lower Merion High School, that we are good neighbors. And I think, especially when it comes to parking and kids parking in the neighborhood, we need to be really careful that we are clear in what is, and that's not necessarily a transportation thing. That might be a communication thing. That might be, right? But I think we just need to make sure that we are good neighbors in this community here, because that is a long-standing tension. And I just want to make sure we don't do anything to make that worse.
I'm sorry. Since I'm the DEI director, I just want to make sure that we're also looking to make sure we're not putting a hardship on a certain population as well. And we want to make sure that as students are walking too, that we're looking at safety, which I'm sure we are, but I do want to make sure that for certain populations that they're not the ones that's going to be walking where other students may have means to drive or get dropped off. So I just wanted to throw that out there as we're having this conversation.
Yes, it is very much going to be South Ardmore that is impacted the most by this. And I think we need to be cognizant of that, absolutely.
So I think as Uldis does his analysis, then what we can do administratively is look at the wins and losses, right? The areas of opportunities and the areas of struggle. For every decision, what's the immediate impact and what the ripples in the pond are? And then we can bring that back with a recommendation for the board to look at. And then that way, we'll have the data, because I think we have the data, it's just not all together in one spot. So let's get the data in one spot. Uldis will do his evaluation. We'll take a look at it administratively and say, if we do X, Y will happen, and how we'll have to communicate that and work around any barriers that exist. And that will help us formulate a recommendation back for consideration. Fair?
And that felt like a really good ending point, but I would ask just to talk a little bit about sorry.
You always have to have the last word.
No, I just want to, well, that was nice, Steve, but now we're going to really. Just because we've invested, had something to do with it, all this, and Rich and their team looked at that opt-out scenario, which I think is an important one that we've already started to figure out ways in which our system could allow us to do this. And I think it's an important piece just to have that full picture of where we are. If you just want to introduce that concept.
Yeah, opting out, let's call it that, it's opting out. There will be ability to opt in, but we're asking people if they're not going to use buses, because there have been districts, I talked to districts who have done it reverse, saying you have to opt in. Summer went by, parents didn't opt in, and then in September, they got 700 parents in the last minute opting in, requesting transportation, which we legally have to provide, and that throws the system complete disarray. So the opting out I think would be great for us, like for our ability to estimate our bus usage and assigning proper numbers of children to the buses. What we looked at it, the thing with that is that we would need to know by July 1st if people, because that's when we really hit road routing the runs and everything, getting ready for September. Because if somebody starts opting back, if in August, we already have all runs set up, so then we have to revise everything. The other thing we would like, was a discussion about parking permits. It would be helpful for parents to know if, before opting out, if their child will have a parking permit. Other question, I guess probably legal question, when you get a parking permit, is it automatic opting out possibility?
You could legally set that up, yeah.
So,
Just as a thing about the parking, because I know there's conversation about high school parents now advocating with Dr. Johnson to do the permits by semester and not for a full year, to give more kids an opportunity to have parking. So I think that needs to be part of this conversation. Just putting that out there.
yeah, that would little bit, again, it's what I try to also, like, when we talk about opting back in, it seems like, oh, well, one student will opt back in. What if it's two students and that bus is already to capacity? I have to move stops from one bus to another bus, maybe to another bus. So adding 2-3 students sometimes may impact 3-4 buses, and timing for all those buses for families, and then we have to send out a message saying, hey, your timing has changed, and we get calls of parents who aren't happy because they already developed their schedule around their bus time of their child. So that's where it's like it has to be minimized. The opting back in has to be, it's going to take at least 5 business days to put a child back on. And the other thing we would like to ask is that July 1st is a deadline, and there is no opting in until, let's say, October 1st, when we have runs set up, when everyone has buses running less or more on time. And that way we can then, students who need to opt in, we can adopt them in the system.
I have a few questions. I know you're shocked. I guess on the opting in, I wondered if, this might be a Ken question, if you opt out, could you have set times that you have to opt back in? Or if you are, like you said, all this, or you can only, if you are within, like, under the 2 miles, you can't opt back in if the legal standard is 2 miles? Because we're not like, if we set that you could walk, let me try to get this out. If you set that 2 miles was the zone, but we will, coming back from Dr. Yanni's, what he said about looking at, we'll actually provide busing to 1.5, up to 1.5 miles, if you opt in by July 1st. Otherwise, if it's under the 2 miles, you can't opt in until the following year again. But if it is,
So partially opt in, partially opt out. Sounds like, so if you're over 2 miles, it's an opt out system, and if you're under 2. No,
You
do
you
want to try it?
You have,
I know what you're saying.
you have very broad discretion.
Right.
On what you can do to the students that are within the 2 mile, under the 2 miles. You can put all kinds of criteria in place, opting in, opting out, paying for transportation, shuttle bus. You've got a ton of options. So you've got a ton of flexibility, parking, permits, anything. So yes, you can probably, most of the things that you can imagine, you can make those requirements.
So rather than my brain going wild and bothering you all with all my ideas that are coming up, I'm making a joke, but it wasn't received as one. It would give us the most.
No, we actually think
You
your ideas
like
are
my
great.
humor?
We like your
Oh,
ideas.
thanks, Ken.
We like being
Thanks.
bombarded with your ideas.
From a board policy standpoint, to give administration the most flexibility to activate their expertise in figuring this out, it behooves us in the administrative regulation to set it at 2 miles, and then them come back and say, actually, we're going to provide it to 1.5 or whatever else the options are, so that we don't put restrictions on the most creative and third wave solutions to getting our community everything that they would, as close to possibly want. Is that right?
And that is exactly how we've crafted policy 810, to
Yeah.
allow you to do that.
Yeah, okay. And then my other, like, food for thought, probably not for the AR, but just, is there a way to incentivize people opting out? Because I keep coming back to, it is easier to get people to spend more money on basically anything aside from buses in my short time that I've been on the board. So just food for thought and how we could allocate resources.
One question just to follow up on that, and forgive me for not being really up to speed on the opt-out issue. I assume that means that students or families will opt out of the right to take a bus that are otherwise.
These are, well, there's two types of opt-outs we're talking about. One is an opt-out or not opting in for anything for people under 2 miles. And the other one is people who have a legal entitlement to the transportation, opting out in return for some form of consideration, i.e. parking permit.
Right. So I guess.
I'm sorry, can I just add that, I mean, we do know that there are some students because of their activities or because of other reasons where they have, like, that aren't going to utilize transportation. We'd had conversations about out of the sort of the greater good concept that some would like come forward and say, this isn't something I'm using regularly anyway, so take my name off the list unless and until I do need it when it snows. So, I mean, that, that did surface, so I just didn't want to limit it to.
Yeah, that was my,
connection.
just to follow up on the question in terms of how do you incentivize that? Because why should anybody opt out, even if they're never going to use it, say, well, I don't want to give it up because I might want to use it. And I don't want to remove so that was my thought was, my kids, they never lied, we had the right to take to Welsh Valley. We lived, 5-minute walk to Welsh Valley, but we had a right to the bus. They never took the bus. But we probably wouldn't say give up the right to it. You know what I'm saying? So
If you want to enforce an opt-out for someone with an entitlement, there needs to be consideration. Which, parking permit, whatever, free pizza, whatever.
Since we're talking so much around, mostly around Lower Merion High School, just some other things that I know are swirling up around with current high school parents that should be part of the just overall thinking. One idea that I threw out to Dr. Johnson that I think some of my neighbors will not be happy about is that I think it would not be unreasonable to say, if you live within this geographic area of the high school, you should not be able to apply for a parking permit, right? I live a quarter mile. People on my street should not be allowed to apply for a parking permit. I live closer than the other thing that we need to consider and to be cognizant of is that more and more students are now parking at the suburban square
Free lot.
parking garage. That is not why they built it. That is not its purpose. And also talking about it being a good neighbor, I think that there are liability issues there. But I see every morning many students walking from there. And so I think that just has to be part of the conversation and part of the communication that goes out in all of the sort of bigger pictures that we need to be really careful about those pieces. So anyway, that's, I just want to make sure that we pull in that I know Dr. Johnson's getting tons of emails and conversations around parking at the high school so that if we are seriously talking about some changes here, that needs to be part of that conversation.
Thank you, yeah.
Because Anna, you're exactly right. If we want to make changes like changing school start time, there are going to be impacts to it.
And we're gonna have to invest in a few more wheelies to measure the distances because all this will result in us saying it's 2 miles, now it's 2 miles and 1 inch. So we do it all the time. We walk with the parents with a wheel and we measure the distance. So you're gonna be seeing me around Ardmore measuring because there will be disputes if it's 2 miles or it's not. And it's by the public roads and not alleys and stuff. So it's going to be interesting, but it's fine.
I had some other questions about definitions in here. Is it okay to move forward with that? I was wondering about, in here we define a secondary student as 5th through 12th grade. So I just had a question is that how we're defining a secondary student in the district in general, as a secondary student?
Yeah, now that we have fifth grade at the middle school, that's going to be our generally accepted definition.
Okay. Wondering if there's any nuance or additional language to include fifth and sixth grade in their own I know middle schoolers can be all sizes, and also with defining the middle school as secondary, it takes it from 3 to 2, and I wondered if those numbers impact your capacity in a meaningful manner in a way that we would want to reconsider this definition, just food for thought.
Just for the purposes of this policy.
For the
as
purposes
opposed
of this
to, like,
policy,
okay,
yeah.
yeah,
First, I
gotcha.
just didn't know if that was what it was, but then second, did we want to use a different definition, maybe grades instead of elementary versus secondary, to get more capacity? And I don't know if it would even make a meaningful change, but
Yeah, it's really difficult to answer, but I think it's something gonna have to be a little bit adjusted because walk zone is different for grades 9 to 12. That's 2 miles. And 1.5 is for the rest of this. So
So
it's
maybe
kind of
aligning it
yeah,
to
so
that.
maybe along those lines, something can, because 9 to 12 can walk 2 miles, 8th grade can't.
interesting. And the other question I had was, the use of recording devices on school buses. I think it's great that we outlined it here. This might be a question for, Ken and Megan, but I thought that it was quite extensive here about some of the other, like if you want to get the access of the video and all these sorts of things. And I didn't know if that policy is actually the same for if there was something recorded in our school buildings, and maybe we just reference or point people to that policy in general, or if there's not a separate policy, do we make a separate policy to just have that, have the protections?
I believe this is very similar to what you have for your building security policy.
Yeah.
So if your question is, why don't we simply say, see building security policy, if you want to see a surveillance video, we could probably do that.
Yeah, or make sure that there aren't protections here for parents, families, and staff that aren't in the other one, or vice versa, and just make sure they're in alignment and ease it up.
Sure.
I have a nitpicky one. On page 52, under additional guidelines, number 1, the Lower Merion Board of School Directors shall annually adopt school bus routes. I don't think technically we do that, and perhaps it should be rephrased.
We will confirm that you don't have to, and then take it out if you don't. Sorry, I just need to double check and make sure that's not a requirement that you're supposed to be doing that.
Okay.
It's not in an AR7.
Okay, I had a couple of questions. Number 1 on page 49. I just was curious, we have that we say elementary students who must travel by public highway, but then we say secondary school students who must travel by public highway or publicly accessible pathways. Why do we not include publicly accessible pathways with elementary students?
I don't recall, this is old language. This is-
Okay.
We didn't change, we didn't touch any of this other language. This was already in the regulation. We just exported stuff from policy into the air. We didn't go back and review, but we're happy to.
Okay.
Just like, same with Lucy's question too.
Yeah.
So we'll just find out if that needs to be consistent or not.
Yeah, and I just wondered, where does the term public highways come from? Is this something
School
that? I'm sorry?
It's in the school code.
It's school.
Yeah, that's the,
That's the phrase they use in section 1361, et cetera.
And do they define it anywhere?
Not in 1361, but they I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
Like, is it like state road, like Lancaster's a state road, Montgomery is different, right? Like,
It could be, it could be defined either in the school code somewhere or somewhere else, or it could be defined in case law, or it could be defined in the third place. But we'll find out where the definition of public highway comes from.
Ken, I just checked school code because I play a lawyer on Friday mornings. It says the establishment of route schedules and loading zones which comply with laws and regulations together with the provision of planned instruction for school bus drivers serving in the district. So I don't think that it doesn't say anywhere in that section that we have to actually approve the bus routes.
The board does.
Right.
Yeah. I don't think it does.
Yeah.
What section were you looking at?
23.4.
Oh, okay. Those are the state board regulations.
Yeah. I would also ask Ken, when we figure out what exactly what a public highway is, that we might as well figure out also what a publicly accessible pathway might be.
Okay. That,
And
I'm
you
confident
have
is
your
not
rabbit hole for
defined
the
anywhere.
weekend.
So you would think that 2 years on the policy committee, I'd know exactly what to do next. But I would like, if we want to propose that you all change to the limits, do we need to agree here, or what are the
You-
next steps?
No, if you adopt the policy changes that have been proposed, then the regulation is the only thing is what will define distances. So theoretically, you would not have to vote to approve the regulation.
Got it. So then then Dr. Yanni and the team can do what they will with the AR. There's nothing else we need to do today.
Correct.
Got it.
Legal, yes, correct.
And I just want to point out, because it was something that I learned since I've been on the board, is that in our district, we're going to change the policy to give the administration much more opportunity to make changes. But we are somewhat unique as a district in that the board is involved and sort of reviews the ARs and is integrally, so it's not as if, I just don't want to give the impression that the board is saying, oh, this isn't our problem anymore, we're just going to let you do it all. Like, it is still a partnership as we move forward. It's just by changing the policy in this way, it provides the opportunity for you to do more work.
So then
We would bring this back as an administrative, so we even have that section, administrative regulations, so likely you would see us bring that back as an agenda item under that topic, so.
But the policy can go to the full board for voting now?
Yes.
Okay. Do I need to say anything specific from like 1800 at this point to move it forward? No?
Sorry, what? I know that was a joke, but I didn't quite get it.
I said, do I need to say anything specific from like 1800 now? Because it's like so formalized.
Now therefore too, you may proceed.
Just throw in a few wherefores and
Yeah.
therefores and
Okay.
opportunities. Whereas, you'll be fine.
Okay.
So the AR though will reflect current language from the policy other than what we've discussed today, and then we will continue to revise it. So that's where everything will land. In case people are looking like it doesn't disappear from policy, it's now in the AR that we'll continue to refine. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
and
you.
thank you for offering us partnership, because we will need your support. Whatever is implemented, we need you to stand behind us to make sure, because we will need it. I know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
No. All right, moving on to a less exciting topic. School day for students, policy 804, page 66. Some minor revisions, most importantly, indicating the change in our start times that you see there. That was the only purpose of updating this policy.
I just had a question, because the part about 188 days is on the hours. I believe that there's legislation at the state level. I was wondering if we could just get an update and how that would impact this.
Yeah, I think we just have to make sure that the language is flexible enough that we comply with current law, because that does seem like there'll be a change there.
We can make a notation that reflects that current.
Is that material, substantive?
This is first read, so, yes, so we can,
Change away.
that's a good question.
All right, guys. So, we're on 804, school days for students, and it's being adjusted for the new school times for what will be in September 2024. Okay, just drawing us back.
Thank you. That was good reset. And if we're okay with that, we just have a few other agenda items that I don't think will take too much longer. No, I'm just mindful of the time here. So if we're okay to move that forward with the minor revision we talked about. Okay to take on the AR 137, which is also just a very minor adjustment on beginning on page 67, page 68. We identified a little bit of a disconnect between what we're defining the report to be and who can file it. So we wanted to make it clear that either a student or on their behalf, a staff, parent, guardian, or staff member could make that report in the event there is a missing or suspected stolen laptop. So that was the only minor adjustment, because it could be the case that we would have someone doing it on their behalf. And that triggers a report in another section. So there was some inconsistency with that. So that was the only adjustment we wanted to make. Oh, and George Frazier's.
Excuse me,
It's too much fun.
Megan,
Yes,
can I go back to 804 for 1 second?
of course.
Just looking at the language in A, which says, unless altered by resolution of the board beginning in September 2024, blah, blah, then it sets the times. Isn't that always the case, that the board can always alter a policy? Isn't that redundant language? Unless altered by resolution of the board. Isn't that,
Is resolution different than policy?
I mean, a policy can always be altered or changed. I mean, why is that necessary in there?
I don't think it's, well, that's, first of all, it's the language that's always been there, so it just didn't change it. Legally, can you delete it? Sure. I don't know. It does tee up sort of an expectation, though, that this isn't going to change unless the board does something in public, that's all. It just tees up an expectation, but you don't legally need it.
Right, but doesn't the fact that it says that we can alter it by resolution, meaning it wouldn't need to go through the policy process? We can just, on a Friday, say, on Monday, we're going to have a resolution that changed school start times, and as of Monday, the start times change. Whereas if it doesn't have that, then we have to go through the policy process. So maybe it shouldn't, maybe that resolution shouldn't be in there, but I think that's the difference.
I think you always have the ability to make an exception to policy by a resolution. So that always does exist, but you don't do it. That's not your practice. This sort of tees up the reader that even though it's not our practice to just make exceptions to policy
we reserve the right to do that in this case, just by making a resolution and changing the policy just by resolution. I think it just, that's all it, I think that's all it does, is it just, it subtly alters the expectation of the reader that you reserve the right to just fix this with a vote. Change this with a single board vote. That's all it does, but you don't legally need it.
Why do we need it in there? I mean,
Maybe we should take it out, just to be more consistent across policies.
yeah.
I think, my recommendation would be to take it out because I think a naysayer could read that and think that there's a likelihood that the board would
Exactly,
change it without going through the process.
Agreed.
Okay.
I also had something on 804. I very much appreciate the gender fluidity and taking out his, her designee. I just wondered, in a wild scenario, could it be inferred that it doesn't have to be the superintendent's designee, and should we add superintendent or superintendent designee?
You mean at C?
In C,
Or there.
yeah, there, yeah, something, yeah. Yeah.
That
Is
was
it-
for C instead of, like, it says it right underneath C, superintendent or designate, but it's for C.
Is it unusual that the policy says the date of the change? I don't recall other policies, I'm sorry, yes, other policies having a date in there. And I guess I understand why we have to do it in this particular situation, but is that? Is that something that next September would be a non-material change that we could just take out without having to redo our policy?
You could do that, or you could just put effective date at the top of the policy,
Right.
whatever you prefer. Why don't we just put effective date at the top of the policy and then take out that?
Because the rest of the stuff is still.
No, because otherwise you wouldn't have anything for this year.
Yeah.
We've had, I think it was some training requirements. We've had a date and a policy before where the next time we took it out, so
Next year.
I think it's just for those that, the people that frequently read policy might just see that and be confused if it doesn't have the date in it. I think we can go back and change it.
Well,
Oh, effective, yeah.
yeah, I like that better.
Okay, excellent.
You don't have anything. You just don't have anything in effect for this year, that's all. Did they say okay with it, 36?
I think so. So jumped back, and then 137, okay with that minor change. I guess that's a question mark. And if so, we just have a couple of updates. I think they'll be quick on where we're headed with some of the policies that have been on our future discussion list for a while. So thank you, George. And Dr. McGloin's going to give us a little overview of where that committee work is right now.
We actually have a few committees that are in a process of making some changes recommended to the school board, and those changes will impact policy 212, 213, really the AR for 213, and then policy 217. So the first one is a report card committee we have at the middle level right now. So when we shifted to the 5-8 model, we did not change report cards. So our fifth grade report card looks like the elementary report card. We did shift this year from trimesters to quarters because because of Power School and how we're able to report and not report. We had to make a shift. Last year, we actually ran trimesters in fifth grade and quarters in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. And as you can imagine, it's a little confusing. So we shifted to quarters. We are a standards-based report card in fifth grade. In sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, we look much more traditional from a report card standpoint. So last year, we pulled a committee together and we began to have discussions on an updated 5 to 8 report card. We're not at the end of that at this point in time. We're still in progress and working on it. A survey is going to go out to our staff this week, as a matter of fact, getting input from them. We'll also survey our students and our parents. Goal is that by January, February, we hope to maybe have a document that we could start to vet out through all of our different groups, with the intent by next school year to have a new 5-8 report card. That is what our goal is at this point in time. So that will have an impact on 213, policy 213, that AR piece. And I guess 212 could be impacted as well. 212 is reporting of student progress. That actually hasn't been updated since 2006, so it's time for us to take a look at it anyway. But it's pretty short. It could potentially, though, be impacted because of report card. The second thing that we've had ongoing, I would say, in the district for a long time is looking at high school graduation requirements, what counts towards graduation, what doesn't count towards graduation as far as courses are concerned. That's been a discussion for a long time. So last year we began to rethink that and we talk about it. And so one of the things that we're reviewing right now is the credit requirements for graduation, including credit count. So right now, we have 21 credits that are required for graduation. It is the lowest of any surrounding district around us, so we're having a lot of conversations on, should it stay at 21, should it change? There's some movement towards 24 credits, but we need a lot of things to be evaluated before you make any kind of recommendation on that, but that's one piece. The second piece is alignment to the state requirements, because we count our senior project as part of the requirements. We'll want to up at least to 21.5, I believe, just to align with the state requirements. Also, what requirements we have in the district, so do we want to rethink those as part of that process? And then what courses count towards graduation? Our electives at this point in time do not count towards our GPA graduation, the GPA. And so there's been a lot of discussion on that, even prior to my arrival in the district, on what should count towards the GPA and what should not count towards the GPA. We'll be making another recommendation on that moving forward. And then, so that's all policy 217. That all is in that piece of that policy. In the policy 213 AR specifically, what we'll be looking at with graduation is our weighting scale. Right now, our weighting scale is a 1-point additional weight for honors and AP credit. When we look at it from an equity lens, it's really inequitable for our students. And so we've done a lot of work to look at surrounding districts and what the weighting is, had discussions on should we wait, should we not wait. I believe we'll come back and tell you we want to wait, but the weighting is going to be much more tight and probably most likely, and again, I'm not at the end of the road with this either, we might see honors be weighted different than AP, and dual enrollment. The law last year changed, so any dual enrollment course has to be counted at an AP level. Prior to that, we actually didn't even count it because it's our business courses. This is the first year it's counted as an AP level course. So you may see some shifts. You're definitely going to see some shifts in weighting. I just don't exactly know what the weighting scale will be recommended as when we come back to the school board. That will be happening. November, December is when you'll start to see that discussion from us. Policy will not change until after this, after that point in time, because realistically, it's for next year where we'll start to talk about it. We also do need to talk about how are we going to roll this out? Do we do it all at once? Do we do it incrementally? And I don't have that answer either. As you can tell, it's kind of big, right? And there's a lot of layers to the whole thing. But we've been working through it probably for a year at this point in time. And I feel confident in some of our decision points, not all the way there on others. Yes.
I have a lot of feelings on this. One question I have is around the impact, and this was a conversation when they switched, like, what was an A versus an AV, like what the number was with A minus, things like that. I know that some parents brought up the impact on merit and scholarships for college, and I just would want to make sure that that is also something that's being researched when looking at that, because sometimes some colleges have very just basic, you need this number, and that can have a real financial impact for some of our students.
Rich Marta is also a part of our conversation and has been a part of our conversation, who is our Director of School Counseling in the district. And so he has worked with our department chairs, our administrators, and will continue to have that conversation with him. So I'll bring that up and make sure that's something we're considering.
And I didn't know that about the dual enrollment with it being the same as AP, because that's sort of interesting. And I'm sure that you provide much more context, but to me, then my gut reaction to then have honors being less than those seems just a little bit off to me, but.
Well, dual enrollment are college credits, right? And so we've worked hard to vet the courses that we are offering at the high school to make sure that they're robust enough, but AP is considered a college credit, dual enrollment is a college credit. And so there was some shifts in the law last year with dual enrollment, in that every school district had to have dual enrollment. It was mandatory. We were fine, we already had it in place, but some districts did not have it in place. And then the second piece of it was that AP weighting, because it's equivalent. I think it's important, though, when you're looking at dual enrollment partnerships, that you are really critical to make sure that they're robust and they meet our standards as a district, honestly. So we continue to talk about, should we expand? But part of our view on that is making sure that whatever we're going to take on is a robust offering for our students. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yes, similarly to dual enrollment, I'd just be curious to see how that interplays into some of the high school programming around having full college accreditation for being able to have your associates post high school. So that could be wrapped into this. But my question also was, it would be really helpful when you come back with this to really take us into the criteria for honors in AP. The question behind the question is that I actually think some of this tracks our data down to elementary and who is being put in certain classes in middle school that then advantages them, especially in math in 8th grade, for getting credit all the way through high school. So I hope to see the full scope in this conversation because it's all integrated.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So a lot to come back with, clearly. So that'll be towards the wintertime, and then report cards, we'll really be having discussions in springtime with the hope and the goal of September start. Again, that's another one that I feel like is an onion, because when you start talking about A, B, C, D, it becomes about grading as well, and homework, and all the other things that go along with it. So they're both a work in progress for us right now.
Ms. Brown? I didn't know if you had any comments. We hadn't asked you this whole time, and I wanted to throw it out there if you had anything to say about the policies that we'd looked at today. Thank you.
That concludes our agenda for today.
Okay, the next policy committee meeting will be on November 3rd. Looking forward to seeing everyone.
Want me to just run it down real quick?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Right.
Ken is going to run down.
Policy 151A is being up for adoption, recommended for adoption. Policy 004 recommended for a new first reading. Policy 007 will be first reading and revisions to the AR. Policy 810 recommended for first reading as presented, revisions to the AR. And policy 804 has been presented for first reading with revisions. AR 137 will be posted.
Thank you, Ken. We're adjourned.